not unsurprisingly, Mr. Putin and his life in general is currently under the spotlight. This is a leader who, since taking power 2 decades ago, has travelled extensively, and they've had to plant another forest the size of the North Island just to offset his emissions of his illusion. In 2017 he visited 18 countries on state duty. 2018 it was 21. But what about New Zealand? Are we talking a singular or a plural visits? And to answer that question, we probably need to take a look at this ocean liner. The Mikhail Lermontov. The luxurious Russian-owned Mikhail Lermontov was at the beginning of a 2-week cruise out of Sydney into New Zealand in '86, with a crew of 348 and 372 passengers, mostly Australians. This was a salubrious vessel, 150 metres long with 12 decks high. Check out the Nevsky bar, the Neptune, without an E, bar. Apparently the polonium cocktails were half price during happy hour. And who could forget the Leningrad restaurant? In case you were wondering, the gulags are down the back on the left. Mid-afternoon on the 16th of February 1986, the Mikhail Lermontov departed Picton Port at the top of the South Island with a Kiwi harbour master guiding them into the straits between the South and North Islands. In short, he did a piss-poor job. This is the MK gradually sinking that evening at around 8. After the vessel had struck rocks and it ripped a 25-metre hole in her port side. Fortunately, it sunk close to shore and slowly. All but one, a crew member, made it off safe. If you're good at holding your breath, you can still check out the last smorgasbord. It rests today where it sank, just 35 metres below the surface. Who was to blame and who was going to pay? A preliminary inquiry was hastily held, headed by New Zealand's Chief Marine Inspector under the watchful eye of the Minister of Transport, who at the time was Richard Prebble. There is an important political backdrop to all of this. At the end of the 70s, New Zealand had a checkered history with Russia, expelling the ambassador over the Afghanistan invasion and supporting a boycott of the Russian Olympics in 1980. Diplomatic relations were not rekindled till 1984. The Russians were strangely hesitant to be part of this inquiry. At best, wanted procedures to be concluded with haste, and the key crew members returned home, leading to rumours that the vessel was carrying a covert cargo. Some of the crew members weren't stewards, and they were KGB agents spying on elderly Australians and not just taking holiday snaps in New Zealand. One of the ones I remember from that time, lasted all the way into the 90s, was that the missing Russian sailor didn't go down with the ship. He defected and changed his name. Locals in New Zealand seem to have forgotten this was a Russian ship. This was their loss, not ours. A team was sent out from the motherland to be part of the Wellington-based inquiry, pay it lip service, before undertaking their own investigations back home. This is where we get to the meaty bit. And here are some pictures of the Russian team going in to support the captain of the vessel. Take a look. There'll be a test at the end, by the way. Go on, make your own conclusions as to the identity of one of those Russian observers. What adds some credibility to this story is, Putin was 34 at the time, around the same age as that bloke looks like, and he worked for the shady KGB, who constantly popped up in places they shouldn't. For the record, the inquiry concluded the bleeding obvious. Local harbour master New Zealander Don Jameson was to blame. The captain would go on to face trial back in Russia and get a 4-year suspended sentence. And those 1986 photos of a Putin-esque man are the sole so-called evidence we have for Vladimir being in New Zealand in 1986. Let's do a better comparison between Mr. X and Mr. P. And both those photos were taken in 1986. Indeed, a striking resemblance, but it's not the same chap. Well, there's also a bit of me that wanted it to be true as well, simply for the intrigue. No one has identified Mr. X as far as I could ascertain. There are some other facts that also point for this not being Mr. Putin. Whilst his time in the KGB between 1985 and 1990, based in East Germany, is to say the least clouded, there is enough factual information to be sure. He was at the birth of his second daughter, Katharina, in Dresden on the 31st of August 1986. His job in Germany was counterintelligence, working hand in hand with the dreaded Stasi, basically trying to undermine West Germany and keep the locals on the straight and narrow. There is no evidence his scope went any further than Germany. From an operational point of view, this would have been all but unviable for starters, unless he went undercover to, say, Austria. He only spoke fluent Russian and German. Whilst Mr. X in the photos could speak and read English and was there to assist with translation, nowhere in my research could I find out exactly who he was. Most seem to indicate he was from head office. Perhaps an eagle-eyed viewer can conclusively identify him, put his name and his details as to what he did in the comments. And it's not his brother either. They both died in infancy. We also have a photo taken in Auckland at the informal meetings that took place before the opening of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, APEC. It's September 1999 and Clinton and Putin are in discussions. At this juncture, he'd only been in power for a month or so, more interested in his formative years with trade and not tanks. You'll notice there's a translator between the two. If it was him in the alleged 1986 photos, in the ensuing 13 years he's gone from being able to understand complex maritime vocabulary spoken in rapid-fire Kiwi accents to now needing a translator to discuss how cheating on your wife differs between the two countries. Swap tips, perhaps. Now, if it was Putin's missus, or at least his old missus, this would be a different kettle of fish. She's a polyglot, speaks numerous languages fluently. There has also been some mention by New Zealand journalists in the past that Agent Putin was based in Singapore at that very time. That posting meant that New Zealand was in his sphere. Poppycock. The sinking inquiry was held between February and early March 1986. The Russian team didn't hang around. Mr. Google quickly tells us the real Putin was in Leningrad for the birth of his first daughter in April 1985, before getting a job in East Germany later that year. If he undertook a mission out of a mysterious KGB regional base in Singapore, his time frame on the ground would have been only a few months, and then back to the birth of number 2. And what language do they speak in Singapore again? Now ask yourself, what benefit would a KGB spy be in a specialised case that was dealing with salvage rights, navigational terms and the like? Who was to blame and who was going to be liable? That's the territory of a specialised marine insurance underwriter. At the very least, a Russian that knew port from starboard would be of benefit. So what we do know 100% is that Putin was in Auckland for the APEC leaders meeting in 1999. And that's him getting off his Aleutian at Auckland Airport the 11th of September 1999. Shaking hands with the then New Zealand Prime Minister, Jenny Shipley, at the Auckland Museum that was the acting HQ for the event. You get a turnabout hosting APEC, meaning it was New Zealand's next turn in November last year, 2021. Auckland got the nod again. Chief venue was to be the Sky City Convention Centre. It's the one burning in the background, late 2019. On the invite list was one Mr. V. Putin. When I say was, the meeting itself was curtailed thanks to COVID and became a glorified Zoom fest. That's Mr. P looking on. One can tell from the photo he's positively gripped by the goings on. in between flicking screens to hotrussianchicks.com. That site went dead just this week, by the way, when the ruble crashed, and doing dirty acts for overseas men for the equivalent of 2 pieces of sawdust bread just simply wasn't worth it. An unnamed friend told me that, by the way. If you ever needed more evidence, the guy is 10 bottles to the dozen. Look how tidy his desk is. That's not normal. And there you have it, comrades. The bully on Putin's one time in NZ. If you want more along this theme, Russian spies in New Zealand and their recruits, only true stories, this is one I did on Bill Sutch, along with the self-prescribed communist and New Zealand's biggest bioterrorist, Stewart Smith. Links for both of those two in the description. I will spot you next time. Till then, Zadarovia. Cheers.